the AI6 podcast with Joanne Sweeney.
Welcome to today's AI6 Long Listen podcast episode. In today's show, I'm taking a closer look at the intersection of technology and policy in the European Union. AI is rapidly transforming our world, offering incredible opportunities. However, with this transformative power comes the potential for misuse, particularly in the realm of AI-generated content. So how do we act against AI criminality? Because let's face it, it's big business. First, let's hear from Brad Smith, Vice Chair and President of Microsoft, who talks about their six-part strategy to combating abusive AI-generated content.
At Microsoft, we sat down early in the year and we devised what we thought of as a six-part strategy where we're spending our energy. And let me just walk through it briefly, not so much to tell you about what we're doing, although I do feel good about it, but because I think it is representative of what many tech companies are doing and what even more tech companies can do in the future. I think it starts on the left with building a strong safety architecture. When you are in the business of providing a reputable product, when you're creating tools that people can use, harnessing the power of AI to create imagery, to create a video, to include voice, we need a strong safety architecture. This is where our Office of Responsible AI and engineers across Microsoft have come together. We work with OpenAI. It starts when OpenAI is training and testing models. It then comes into the applications layer, typically at Microsoft, and it really requires, as we are finding on an ongoing basis, that we build in place the kind of architecture that will prevent these kinds of abuses. The second thing that we need to do is continue to advance the state of the art for genuine content through so-called provenance and watermarking. This is where a company like Adobe has long been a leader, where the industry has come together, where Microsoft has partnered not only with Adobe, but IBM, the BBC, and others with C2PA, what has really taken off as an industry-wide standard. And it connects with that first pillar, so that when people use products to create something with AI, there is the kind of embedded watermark that tells people this is not the real thing, this was AI generated. That, I think, is one of the critical steps we need to advance. The third step is really to then focus on safeguarding our services from this kind of conduct. How do we do that? Well, it really involves identifying abusive content. It identifies giving people the opportunity to report abusive content, and then it requires taking action. And different platforms can have different rules. As Senator Klobuchar said, there will be virtue in consistency. First of all, I think the step one is there's virtue in doing something and for seeing companies take action. Oftentimes to remove content, if it's fraudulent, if it's deceptive, if it is seeking to deceive people as to who said what, when, and where, or in other cases, it may involve relabeling so the public is informed. But in every instance, I think it's critical that companies do something. The fourth is really around collaboration. We need to work together. And from my perspective, one of the real milestones in 2024 came at the Munich Security Conference this February, when 20 tech companies came together and we resolved together that we would take action. The action really reflects those first three pillars, with stronger architecture, with stronger protection of provenance and watermarking, with stronger work to protect our platforms. But clearly, the opportunity for collaboration in many ways is still in its infancy. The fourth really involves legislation. One of the things we decided early in the year is that we wanted to think hard. We wanted to put our teams to work. A lot of this is involved work with BSA, trade associations, others, to just canvass all of the great work that is taking place, not only in the United States, but in the European Union, where the EU in many ways has been ahead of the United States in taking action. But think about the kinds of opportunities that would exist for stronger laws here in the United States. And we said we wanted to take a moment in between the two political conventions to share what we think are some of the most exciting ideas. That is what led to the publication of this white paper that has 10 different ideas that we think hold merit, especially here in Washington, D.C., but also at states across the country. And then the last thing I'll highlight is the importance of public awareness and education. If anything, I think this has given me more cause for optimism than I would have predicted when the year began, especially in the context of elections. Because as a company, we've had the opportunity to participate in the Taiwanese elections, in the Indian elections, in the EU parliamentary elections. In fact, we've gone out, we have done training, more than 120 training sessions for almost 3,500 candidates and campaigns in 20 nations around the world. And as we interact with more people, we've combined that support for candidates and campaigns with public awareness efforts. Interestingly, there were a lot of deep fakes in the Taiwanese election, but none of them really deceived the Taiwanese public because people were prepared. They were aware. They were sophisticated. That led us in Europe to launch our own equivalent of a public service announcement, an advertising campaign, all about encouraging people to check, recheck, and then vote. In other words, think before one just accepts.
Now, let's hand over the rest of the episode to the report published last week by Microsoft on abusive AI. The report, Protecting the Public from Abusive AI-Generated Content Across the EU, was launched in the European Parliament, and the event was chaired by Irish MEP Maria Walsh, who was a guest on this show last week, given her work on deepfakes. In the report, Microsoft emphasises the need to ensure that the EU benefits from AI while respecting the rights of EU citizens online. So, I asked Notebook LM to have a conversation about the 38-page report so that you can get the highlights. I linked the full report in the blog post associated with this podcast at publicsectormarketingpros.com. And as always, I'd love your feedback.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. You know we like to keep our fingers on the pulse of all things tech and how those changes ripple through the world.
It's a fast-moving world.
It is. And today's deep dive, well, let's just say it's a big one, AI and the EU. Specifically, how the EU is working to protect people from the dark side of AI, the kind of harms that can come from abusive AI-generated content.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question, right?
It is. Can they really pull this off, keep their citizens safe, but also, not stifle innovation? It's a tightrope walk for sure. And our main source today is a fresh off-the-presses blog post from Microsoft's EU policy blog.
Oh, very timely.
Very, very timely. It gives us this up-close look at how one of the major players in the tech world sees these challenges, and maybe even more important, the solutions being debated within the EU.
Yeah, I mean, what are they thinking?
Exactly. So what we're going to do today is try to pull out the key takeaways, really distill it down for you, what they see as the biggest problems, the steps they're recommending, and paint a picture of what's at stake and what's being done about it. Does that sound good?
Sounds like a plan.
Awesome. Well, the blog post jumps right in, reminding us that AI in the EU isn't some future boogeyman.
Right.
It's already here. Think about businesses using AI to boost efficiency or healthcare. We've got AI diagnostics changing the game, scientific breakthroughs fueled by AI. I mean, this is real. It's happening now.
It's that double-edged sword, right? We always talk about this.
Of course.
So much potential for good, but also potential for harm.
Exactly. I mean, we can't just close our eyes and pretend the risks aren't there. And that brings us to this whole question of responsible AI development. How do we govern this stuff? How do we do it right?
And the blog post points out that this is a particularly interesting time for this conversation in the EU. The new EU mandate, this period from 2024 to 2029, is a kind of a fresh start. They can reevaluate their approach to tech governance.
Yeah, it's like a clean slate.
in a way.
Yeah. And it's interesting to hear Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission president, talk about this. She's been very clear that making AI safer, more trustworthy for EU citizens, that's a top priority. But, and this is a big but, there's also this drive to keep the EU competitive, to make sure they're a leader in AI innovation, and more broadly, this whole digital transformation.
Right.
It's a delicate balance.
A real balancing act. And the blog post is right, to say that we need strong leadership to navigate all this, to steer the ship in the right direction.
But it's not just about the politicians, right? It's got to be a team effort. That's something the blog post stresses, this whole of society approach. It's about bringing together governments, civil society, the organizations that represent people, and the industry itself, the folks actually building these AI tools. Yeah. Everyone's got to be at the table.
It makes sense. And it's actually building on what the EU has already been doing, right? Mm-hmm. They've been working on these legal and regulatory frameworks for online safety. And now those efforts are expanding to cover the specific challenges of AI.
Right. I mean, you can't just take the old rule book and expect it to apply perfectly to this new landscape. And what's interesting is that Microsoft seems to be acknowledging this, right? They specifically mention these ongoing legislative efforts, and they say they're ready to actually implement these new rules. I mean, that's a pretty positive signal.
Yeah, it does seem like they're on board. But the blog post also, it doesn't shy away from pointing out where they see a need for improvement, specifically our legal systems. Like, how do we modernize criminal and other laws to specifically address AI misuse? Because the speed at which AI is developing means the law can't afford to lag behind.
It's almost like the law's playing catch-up. Right.
Yeah, a constant game of catch-up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me in the blog post was this research finding from Microsoft's own internal safety work. They're not just talking about risks in some abstract way. They've identified specific groups that are at greater risk from AI misuse.
Yeah, it's not just a general concern, right?
No, not at all. And they specifically mentioned children, women, and older adults. It's really sobering when you hear those groups named. It just brings home the potential for targeted harm, the need for safeguards that are tailored to those vulnerabilities. Like, think about the ability to generate these hyper-realistic images and videos, even audio, using AI. I mean, that's a whole new level of potential harm, particularly for women and children.
It's scary to think about.
It is. And this brings us to the heart of the matter, right? How is Microsoft responding to all of this? What are they actually doing? And they outline some of their key steps and recommendations in this white paper mentioned in the blog post. So what's the big picture here? What are they trying to achieve?
Well, their core principle is about balance, finding that sweet spot between protection and innovation. They want clear, proportionate rules that protect people from harm, but don't stifle the incredible potential of AI in the EU.
Because let's be honest, if the EU gets too heavy-handed, it could backfire.
Right. Companies could just move their AI development elsewhere.
Exactly. So within that framework, they focus on those three key risk areas we talked about: protecting children from online exploitation, safeguarding women from non-consensual intimate imagery, and protecting older adults, particularly against AI-enabled fraud. Let's take those one by one. Starting with children, what are they actually recommending?
So the blog post doesn't get into the nitty-gritty details, but they're very clear that this needs to be a top priority. We need solutions that are specifically designed to protect children online. It's about things like age-appropriate safety features built into online services, strong mechanisms for reporting harmful content, and making sure those reports are acted upon. Children interact with the digital world differently than adults. They have different vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. It's almost like they're digital natives in a way that we're not.
Yeah, they've grown up with this technology.
Exactly. So moving on to the issue of safeguarding women from non-consensual intimate imagery. This is a problem that's been around for a while, but AI takes it to a whole new level.
It does. I mean, the ease with which you can create these fake but incredibly realistic images, it's terrifying. And it has the potential to do a lot of damage, to ruin lives. The blog post makes it clear that we need both legal and technological tools to combat this. We need stronger laws, but we also need better ways to detect and remove this content.
But I think this is where AI itself can be part of the solution, right?
Absolutely.
Using AI to fight AI.
Exactly. AI can be used to identify these fake images and videos.
Okay. And the third area of focus, protecting older adults, particularly against AI-enabled fraud. Why are older adults so vulnerable here?
Well, they're often targeted by scammers because they might be less familiar with technology or they might be more trusting. And AI makes it even easier for scammers to create these personalized, very convincing scams. It's all about exploiting those vulnerabilities.
Right, tailoring the scam to the individual.
Exactly.
So beyond those specific categories of risk, what are some of the broader steps that Microsoft is taking?
Well, one of the big ones is this idea of safety by design. They want to build robust safety measures right into the design of their services. It's about anticipating potential risks and addressing them from the get-go, not trying to tack on security as an afterthought.
So thinking like an attacker from day one.
Exactly.
And they also talk about some specific technologies, right?
Yes. Durable media provenance and watermarking. Provenance is like a digital trail, a way to trace the origin and history of a piece of content. You can see where it came from, who created it, how it's been altered. And watermarking is a way to embed a digital tag in content, which can help identify material that's been generated by AI.
So like a digital fingerprint.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And these technologies can be really useful in combating misinformation and abuse because you can see right away if something is real or fake or if it's been tampered with.
So more transparency, more accountability.
Exactly. And it's not just about tackling AI-generated content. Microsoft is also committed to tackling all forms of abuse on their platforms, whether it comes from humans or from AI. They want to create a safe environment for everyone.
And they can't do it alone, can they?
No, absolutely not. They emphasize the importance of collaboration, of working with governments, civil society organizations, other tech companies. This is a problem that requires a collective effort.
A global effort, really?
Yeah. I mean, AI doesn't respect borders.
It doesn't. And that's why education and public awareness are so important. We need to empower people to understand AI, to be able to spot potential harms, and to know how to protect themselves.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power.
It is. So if we take a step back and look at the big picture, it seems like Microsoft is advocating for a multi-layered approach, right? Clear, adaptable regulations from the EU, the development and deployment of technical safeguards like provenance and watermarking, stronger legal frameworks that can address AI-specific crimes, and always keeping a focus on the most vulnerable members of our society.
Yeah, that sums it up pretty well.
And they end the blog post with a call to action. They say, the time for action is now. We need to confront these risks head on, because if we do it right, AI has the potential to do so much good. It can empower human creativity, protect our privacy, even strengthen democracy.
It's an optimistic vision, but it's not naive. They recognize the challenges, but they're also confident that we can overcome them.
And they invite everyone to join the conversation, to offer their feedback, to work together to find solutions.
It's a collaborative effort.
It is. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Microsoft's perspective on AI and the EU, a few key things really stand out. The EU has a huge responsibility to protect its citizens from the potential harms of AI, especially those who are most vulnerable. And the solutions they're exploring involve a mix of smart regulations, new technologies, stronger laws, and a commitment to putting people first. It's about finding that balance, that sweet spot where we can harness the power of AI for good, while also protecting ourselves from its potential downsides. And that brings us to our final thought for you to ponder. As AI becomes more powerful, more integrated into our lives, how do we ensure that its development is guided by ethical principles, by a commitment to protecting human dignity and human rights? It's a question that deserves our attention, because the choices we make today will shape the future of AI and ultimately the future of humanity. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.
The AI6 Podcast with Joanne Sweeney.